Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I had to convince a police officer that I owned my own home. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, especially when entitled neighbors are involved. Let me tell you about the day my new neighbor Karen decided to stake a claim on part of my property and how it all unfolded. My name is Thomas, and I'm the proud owner of Oakwood Manor, a historic estate that's been in my family for generations. The manor itself is a beautiful three-story Victorian home, built in 1876 by my great-great-grandfather. It sits on 5 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, complete with gardens, a small orchard, and even a quaint pond. I inherited the property from my grandmother about 5 years ago. Since then, I've poured my heart and soul into restoring and maintaining the manor, ensuring it retains its historic charm while still being a comfortable place to live. It's been a labor of love, and I take great pride in being the caretaker of such a significant piece of local history. The trouble started about 3 months ago when the house next door was sold. The previous owners had been a lovely elderly couple who'd lived there for decades. We'd always had a cordial relationship, exchanging pleasantries over the fence and even sharing produce from our respective gardens. When they decided to move to a retirement community closer to their grandchildren, I was sad to see them go but excited to meet my new neighbors. Enter Karen and her family. From day one, it was clear that they were going to be challenging. Karen was a woman in her mid-40s with a perpetual scowl and a haircut that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager." Her husband, a meek man named Dave, seemed to spend most of his time trying to placate her. They had 2 children, both teenagers, who appeared to have inherited their mother's sense of entitlement. At first, the issues were minor. Karen would complain about the noise from my lawnmower on Saturday mornings, even though I never started before 10 a.m. She'd make snide comments about the old rundown house next door, clearly not appreciating the historical significance of Oakwood Manor. But I tried to be a good neighbor, smiling politely and addressing her concerns as best I could. Things came to a head one sunny Saturday in June. I was out in the garden, tending to my prized rose bushes, when I heard the distinct sound of a chainsaw starting up. Curious, I walked around to the side of the property that bordered Karen's land. To my horror, I saw Dave, chainsaw in hand, about to cut down one of the century-old oak trees that lined the property border. These trees were not only beautiful but also historically significant, having been planted by my great-grandfather. "Excuse me," I called out, jogging over. "What do you think you're doing?" Dave looked up, a guilty expression on his face. Before he could respond, Karen appeared from around the corner of their house. "We're removing this eyesore," she declared, gesturing to the majestic oak. "It's blocking our view and dropping leaves in our yard." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I'm sorry, but this tree is on my property. You have no right to cut it down." Karen's eyes narrowed. "No, it's not. This is our land. The property line is over there." She pointed to a spot about 10 feet into what I knew was my property. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," I said firmly. "The property line is clearly marked by the fence behind you. This tree and everything on this side of the fence belongs to Oakwood Manor." Karen let out a derisive laugh. "Oakwood Manor? You mean that decrepit old house? Please? This is our land now, and we'll do what we want with it." I was stunned by her audacity. "Mrs. I'm sorry, I don't think I caught your last name?" "It's Williams," she snapped. "Not that it's any of your business." "Mrs. Williams," I continued, trying to keep my voice level, "I can assure you that this is, in fact, my property. I have the deed and property maps to prove it. Now, I'm going to have to ask you and your husband to step away from the tree and return to your side of the fence." Dave lowered the chainsaw, looking uncomfortable, but Karen wasn't backing down. "We don't have to do anything," she snarled. "This is our land, and if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Williams, I am the legal owner of this property. If anyone should be calling the police, it's me. You're trespassing and attempting to destroy my property." Karen pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the keypad. That's it? I'm calling cop. We'll see what the police have to say about this." As Karen began her dramatic phone call, exaggerating the situation and painting me as some kind of threatening intruder, I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. How had a simple property line dispute escalated to this point? I decided the best course of action was to stay calm and wait for the police to arrive. Surely they would see reason and put an end to this ridiculous situation. While we waited, Karen continued to rant and rave about her perceived ownership of the land, spouting nonsense about adverse possession and squatters' rights. I tuned her out, instead focusing on gathering the documents I knew would prove my case. I quickly went inside and retrieved my property deed, a recent survey of the land, and some historical documents about Oakwood Manor. About 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of the house. Officer Johnson, a man I recognized from community events, stepped out and approached us. "Good afternoon, folks," he said, his eyes darting between Karen and me. "We received a call about a property dispute. Can someone explain what's going on here?" Before I could open my mouth, Karen launched into a tirade. "Officer, this man is trying to steal our land. We just moved in, and he's claiming that half of our property belongs to him. He even threatened us when we tried to remove a tree from our yard." Officer Johnson turned to me, his eyebrow raised. "Is this true, sir?" I took a deep breath. "No, Officer Johnson, it's not. My name is Thomas Bedford, and I'm the owner of Oakwood Manor." I gestured to the house behind me. "Mrs. Williams and her family are my new neighbors, and there seems to be some confusion about where the property line is located." "He's lying," Karen interjected. "We bought this house, and the realtor told us the property extended to that line over there." She pointed again to the spot well within my property. Officer Johnson held up a hand to quiet her. "Ma'am, please, let's handle this calmly and rationally. Mr. Bedford, do you have any documentation to support your claim?" I nodded, relieved that the officer was willing to listen. "Yes, I do. I have the property deed, a recent land survey, and some historical documents about the manor. Would you like to see them?" "That would be helpful, thank you," Officer Johnson replied. As I handed over the documents, Karen scoffed. "Those could be fake for all we know. I want to see some real proof." Officer Johnson ignored her outburst and began examining the papers. After a few moments he looked up. "Mr. Bedford, these documents seem to be in order. They clearly show that the property line is, indeed, where the fence is located." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That's impossible. The realtor told us?" "Ma'am," Officer Johnson interrupted, "I understand you're upset, but these documents are official and legally binding. The property line is where Mr. Bedford says it is." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and satisfaction. "Thank you, Officer Johnson. I hope this clears things up." Karen, however, wasn't ready to give up. "This is ridiculous. We paid good money for this property, and now you're telling me we have less land than we thought? I want to speak to your supervisor." Officer Johnson sighed, clearly used to dealing with difficult individuals. "Mrs. Williams, my supervisor will tell you the same thing. The property line is legally established and documented. If you have concerns about what you were told when you purchased your home, I suggest you take that up with your realtor or the previous owners." Dave, who had been silent throughout this entire ordeal, finally spoke up. "Karen, honey, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Dave," Karen snapped. "I'm not letting this go. This is our land, and I'll prove it." I decided it was time to try and de-escalate the situation. "Mrs. Williams, I understand this is frustrating for you. Why don't we all take a step back and calm down? Perhaps we could schedule a time to sit down and discuss this civilly. I'd be happy to show you the historical records of both properties." Karen glared at me with such intensity that I half expected to burst into flames. "I don't need to see your fake documents. I know my rights." Officer Johnson stepped between us. "All right, that's enough. Mr. Bedford has provided legal documentation proving his ownership. Mrs. Williams, you and your husband need to return to your property immediately. If you attempt to cut down this tree or trespass on Mr. Bedford's land again, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Then, to everyone's surprise, she burst into tears. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "We were promised this land. Our dream home is ruined." Dave put an arm around her shoulders, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry about all this," he said to me. "We'll go back to our house now." As they turned to leave, Officer Johnson called out, "And Mr. Williams, please don't try to cut down any more trees without confirming they're on your property first." Dave nodded sheepishly and led his still sobbing wife back to their house. Once they were out of earshot, Officer Johnson turned to me with a wry smile. "Mr. Bedford, I apologize for the disturbance. Some people have a hard time accepting reality when it doesn't align with their expectations." I chuckled, feeling the tension of the past hour start to dissipate. "No need to apologize, officer. I appreciate your help in resolving this situation." "Just doing my job," he replied. "But I have to say, in all my years on the force, this is the first time I've had to convince someone they don't own a historic manor. You might want to consider putting up some no trespassing signs, just to be safe." I nodded, making a mental note to do just that. "That's not a bad idea. Thank you again, Officer Johnson." As the police cruiser pulled away, I stood there for a moment, taking in the beauty of the old oak tree that had nearly become a casualty of Karen's entitlement. I made a silent promise to my ancestors to continue protecting and preserving Oakwood Manor, no matter what challenges might arise. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my troubles with Karen and her family. The next few weeks were relatively quiet, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Karen and her family seemed to be avoiding me, which was fine by me. I focused on my work restoring some of the manor's original features and tending to the gardens. However, the peace was short-lived. One Saturday morning, I was awakened by the sound of shouting coming from outside. I quickly threw on some clothes and rushed downstairs to see what was happening. As I stepped out onto the front porch, I was greeted by a bizarre sight. Karen was standing on my lawn, wielding a garden hose like a weapon, and spraying water at a group of people who were trying to approach the house. "Get off my property, you trespassers," she shrieked, waving the hose wildly. I recognized the trespassers as members of the local historical society. They were scheduled to visit Oakwood Manor that day for their annual tour of historic homes in the area. Karen, I called out, hurrying down the steps. What on earth are you doing? She whirled around, nearly hitting me with the spray of water. I'm protecting our property from these invaders. I held up my hands trying to calm her down. These aren't invaders, Karen. They're members of the Historical Society, and they're here for a scheduled tour of the manor. Liar, she spat. I know you're trying to sell our land to these people. Well, I won't let you. I turned to the bewildered group, most of whom were now soaking wet. I'm so sorry about this. Please, come inside and dry off. I'll handle this situation. As the group gratefully made their way into the house, I approached Karen, who was still brandishing the hose like a sword. Karen, I said firmly, you need to stop this right now. You're trespassing on my property and assaulting my guests. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have no choice but to call the police. Go ahead, she screamed. Call them. I'll tell them how you're trying to steal our land and sell it to strangers. I sighed, pulling out my phone. Officer Johnson? Yes, it's Thomas Bedford from Oakwood Manor. I'm afraid I need your assistance again. While we waited for the police to arrive, Karen continued her tirade, spraying water at the windows of the manor where the Historical Society members were peering out in a mixture of fear and fascination. Officer Johnson arrived within minutes, looking weary as he took in the scene. Mrs. Williams, he said, approaching cautiously, we've been through this before. This is not your property. You need to turn off the hose and return to your own home. Never, Karen shouted, turning the hose on Officer Johnson. What happened next was both shocking and, I have to admit, a little satisfying. Officer Johnson, with reflexes I didn't know he possessed, dodged the spray of water and in one swift motion, tackled Karen to the ground. Karen Williams, you're under arrest for assault, trespassing, and disturbing the peace, he announced, cuffing her as she sputtered indignantly. As Officer Johnson led Karen to his cruiser, Dave came running from their house, looking horrified. Oh God, not again, he muttered. I'm so sorry, Mr. Bedford. I'll take care of this. I watched as Dave hurried after his wife, no doubt to bail her out. Again? Turning back to the manor, I saw the Historical Society members cautiously emerging from the house. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, trying to inject some levity into the situation, I hope you'll agree that this has been a truly historic tour of Oakwood Manor. Now, who's ready for some tea and a much drier tour of the house? To my relief, they laughed, and the rest of the day went smoothly. But as I waved goodbye to the last of the guests that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my troubles with Karen were far from over. I was right to be concerned. Over the next few months, Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic and aggressive. She seemed determined to prove that she owned part of my property, no matter the cost. One morning, I woke up to find surveyor's stakes driven into my lawn, creating a haphazard new property line that cut through my garden and came within feet of the manor itself. I immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, Karen had retreated to her house and refused to answer the door. Another time, I caught her teenage son spray painting Williams' property on the side of my garden shed. When I confronted him, he smirked and said his mom had told him to do it. I ended up having to repaint the entire shed to cover the graffiti. The situation came to a head on a crisp autumn morning. I was in my study, going through some old family documents, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a bulldozer starting up. I rushed to the window and felt my heart drop into my stomach. There, on the edge of my property, was a large yellow bulldozer, and behind the wheel, looking gleeful, was Karen. I sprinted outside, waving my arms frantically. Karen, stop. What do you think you're doing? She revved the engine, a manic glint in her eye. I'm reclaiming what's rightfully ours, Thomas. If you won't acknowledge our claim to this land, I'll take it by force. I stood my ground in front of the bulldozer, my heart pounding. Karen, this is insane. You're going to hurt someone or destroy valuable property. Please, turn off the engine and we can talk about this. Talk? She screeched. We're done talking. Move, or I'll move you myself. I could see she was serious. In that moment, I realized just how far Karen's delusion had gone. This wasn't just about a property dispute anymore. This was a woman who had completely lost touch with reality. As Karen inched the bulldozer forward, I pulled out my phone and dialed cop. This is Thomas Bedford at Oakwood Manor, I said, my voice shaking. I have a neighbor threatening to bulldoze my property. I need help immediately. Karen must have realized I was calling the police because she suddenly put the bulldozer in reverse, backing up onto her own property. But instead of stopping, she turned the machine around and lined it up with my beloved oak trees. If I can't have it, neither can you, she shouted, pushing the bulldozer forward. Time seemed to slow down. I watched in horror as the bulldozer's blade connected with the trunk of the first oak tree. The ancient wood groaned in protest, but stood firm against the initial assault. Suddenly, a police siren pierced the air. Karen, startled by the noise, jerked the controls of the bulldozer. The machine veered sharply to the left, missing the oak tree but heading straight for her own house. I watched in disbelief as the bulldozer plowed into Karen's pristine lawn, tearing up the grass and leaving deep treads in the soft earth. It came to a stop mere feet from her front porch, the engine sputtering and dying. Two police cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officer Johnson leapt out, his hand on his holster. "Mrs. Williams," he shouted, "step out of the vehicle with your hands where I can see them." Karen, looking dazed, slowly climbed down from the bulldozer. As the officers handcuffed her, I could hear her muttering, "It's our land. It's our land." Dave came running out of the house, his face ashen. "Oh no," he moaned. "Karen, what have you done?" As the officers led Karen to the police car, Dave turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Mr. Bedford, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. This has all gone too far." I nodded, still in shock from the morning's events. "Yes, it has, Dave. I think it's time we had a serious talk about what's been going on." Over the next hour, as the police took statements and documented the damage, Dave opened up to me. It turned out that Karen had been struggling with mental health issues for years, but had refused to seek help. The stress of moving and the perceived loss of property had triggered a serious decline in her condition. "I should have done something sooner," Dave said, his voice heavy with regret. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I just went along with her, she'd eventually calm down." I felt a mix of emotions, anger at the damage and stress Karen had caused, but also pity for a family clearly in crisis. "Dave," I said gently, "I understand this is a difficult situation, but Karen needs help, professional help, and to be honest, I don't feel safe with her living next door." Dave nodded, wiping his eyes. "I know. I've already called her sister. We're going to stay with her for a while, and I'm going to make sure Karen gets the help she needs. We'll be putting the house on the market as soon as possible." As I watched Dave walk back to his house, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a weight lift from my own shoulders. The nightmare of the past few months was finally coming to an end. In the weeks that followed, Karen was charged with multiple offenses, including attempted destruction of property and reckless endangerment. She was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and begin treatment. Dave and the kids moved in with Karen's sister, and true to his word, they put the house up for sale. As for Oakwood Manor, it stood tall and proud, having weathered yet another storm in its long history. The oak trees, thank goodness, were unharmed. I hired a professional landscaper to repair the damage to the lawn, and slowly but surely things returned to normal. The local historical society, far from being deterred by their wet welcome months earlier, was more interested in Oakwood Manor than ever. They even suggested including the bulldozer incident in future tours as part of the manor's colorful history. A few months later, I was out in the garden, planting some new rose bushes, when a car pulled up in front of the house next door. An older couple got out, looking around with interest. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "We're the Johnsons. We're thinking of buying the house next door. Would you mind if we asked you a few questions about the neighborhood?" I smiled, brushing the dirt from my hands as I walked over to greet them. "Of course not. Welcome to Oakwood Lane. I'm Thomas Bedford, owner of Oakwood Manor. Why don't you come in for some iced tea, and I'll tell you all about our lovely and usually very peaceful little corner of the world." As I led the Johnsons towards the house, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. If they only knew the story behind the for sale sign next door. But that was a tale for another day. For now, I was just grateful for the promise of new, hopefully sane, neighbors and the return of tranquility to Oakwood Manor. Looking back on the whole ordeal with Karen, I realized that sometimes in life, you have to stand your ground, quite literally in my case. Protecting one's property and heritage is important, but so is showing compassion for those who are struggling. In the end, I was glad that Karen was getting the help she needed, and that Oakwood Manor had survived to tell another tale. As I settled in with the Johnsons on the porch, ready to share the rich history of our little community, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Oakwood Manor had been my anchor through this storm, a constant reminder of the importance of roots, history, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. And who knows, maybe one day when the bulldozer incident is nothing more than a funny anecdote, I'll plant a new oak tree on the spot where Karen nearly changed our lives forever. After all, every historic estate needs its legends, and Oakwood Manor had certainly earned a new chapter in its long and storied history. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.